from the good, the bad, the ugly to the sheer insane is live and available freely on the internet. So the role of news media now, and this is borne out by the recent Reuters global report that was released, I think, on Monday, yesterday, that people rely on news to help them understand what's going on and to help them get access to different and diverse perspectives on an issue. So, we gathered this morning to start what has to be an ongoing discussion about how we start to bring issues that are affecting all of us and make sure that they get on the news agenda in a clear, consistent, and ongoing manner. That's whenever journalists approach a story, there's the immediate background question that sits twirling around in their head is going to be, what's the climate change angle to this particular issue or event that's going on here? We've seen massive amounts of coverage, extensive coverage given to the war in Gaza, right, as we should do. What we're not seeing is, what is the climate change impact of that war? Kill people, right? I mean, that's always a bad thing generally. But I think critically, what we forget is that bombs and all of these things have consequences. When you shred buildings and when you do, excuse me, unspeakable things, they have a long-term consequence on the environment. We know this because at the D-Day celebrations that were 80 years ago, you can still see how the landscape around where the D-Day landings occurred is still pockmarked by where the bombs went off. They're still finding unexploded bombs everywhere. Thank you, darling. So there are climate change angles to even the biggest, most overt political stories. At the moment, with this GNU, the issue seems to be, how do we allow two such divergent ideological parties to be in the same government with each other, or three or four, however many actually are in the GNU. And part of it should be about saying, we know that they want to fix the economy, but it can't just be fix the economy. It's got to be fix the economy at what cost, and in what direction do you want to fix the economy? And what is the impact of that on climate change? We're very excited to have you in the room. We've got some activists, we've got some very brilliant legal people, including our partners from ALT, that'll be sharing some fascinating research. And then we've got our lovely friends from New Economy Hub and our other lovely friends from SANEF. So we hope we're going to have some lively discussion, and I hope you enjoy the morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, William, for that. Just some few housekeeping information. If you'd like to go to the restrooms, you can go to your left there, go up the stairs, and you'll see it's on your left-hand side. And as mentioned, if you do want some refreshments of sorts, you can go out to the right-hand side to get a few of those. So our program today is structured in a different format, whereby our first session is going to really focus on key findings, presentations around the topic at hand, and as well as, looking at some research elements to it as well. Then we are going to take a tea break for about 15 minutes, and then thereafter we're going to go into a panel with some of the experts. We're going to now go into depth with the different findings that were presented in the first session. So first up, as mentioned by William, that MMA has been monitoring media coverage since 1994, and one of those key issues that we've been looking at is climate change. And I'd like to call upon Lester Namumba, who's our program manager overseeing our research and analysis, to give a presentation on some of the latest MMA findings when it comes to climate change media coverage. Thank you. Please give a round of applause.
Morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how this works. Let me see. Should have asked this before. Is there anyone in the room whilst we're setting up who knows the difference between climate change and global warming? The scientific difference. climate change and global warming? Anybody? The scientific difference? You can look it up. Any takers? I mean, I'm not a scientist. I can't give the answer, but I'm looking to be educated. I think that's fine. No, that's fine. Thank you. Maybe we can chat about it over tea break. All right. So thank you, Nomshado. I don't have the answer either. So my task is very simple this morning, just to come and give a snapshot of media's coverage of climate change. So Media Monitoring Africa has been monitoring how climate change, how the media has been reporting climate change. We've looked at data from 2014 to 2020. We've looked at different sets of data, but we've also looked at different periods of monitoring. So we've monitored how the media has been reporting climate change during special events like the BRICS summit, or just just checking how the media is reporting outside of important or critical events. But what I'll be sharing with you is just how the media performed during the BRICS summit. Climate change. And our vision is simple, just a fair, a just and fair society that is of course empowered by a free, responsible and quality media. We use a human rights approach to do our work, and using this approach we would like, we aim to promote the development of a critical and constructive communications by the powerful, because they need to be accountable or held accountable. We also look or aim to promote the development of media that is transparent, diverse, ethical, and accountable to its audiences, and of course an informed, engaged, and active citizenry. So, as I said, we looked at how the media reported climate change during the BRICS summit, and our reason for this was simple. We wanted to see if climate change as an issue would be prioritized either by the political leaders or the attendees of the summit, but also by the media, and just to see what kind of narratives were or what kind of discourse was there during that important period. And to do our work, we used an MMA in-house civic tech tool, which basically uses machine learning and natural language processing to extract sources, extract utterances, and a whole lot more, just to be able to help us understand what the discourse on climate change is. And of course, using AI and machine learning, we were able to extract topics, affiliation, gender, the rest of sources, and as well as just looking at which media perform better in terms of quantity and quality of coverage. We did look at 60 or over 60 media, South African media, and some of them I will show you just a little, some of them at the end. But we looked at over 60 different South African online media, and we collected this, like I said, information using Dexter, and were able to collect 690 articles. Now, outside of important events such as elections or BRICS summits in this case, we don't usually see coverage of climate change. It's very minimal, but during the BRICS summit, we did manage to collect 690, and this is because we started the monitoring a month prior to the summit and continued a month after the summit, just to be able to see what kind of narratives are there in media coverage before, during, and after. And our monitoring period was from the 22nd of July to the 15th of September. So I'm just going to touch on a few key findings. Our research is available on our website. We've done other research other than what I'm presenting, like I said, and all of this is available. But I'm also, my team and I are also here to engage if you have any questions. So in terms of the amount of coverage, when you, I don't know, yeah, you can see on the screen. So we have the period before the actual summit, we had articles hovering around 110, between 110, 102, and then during the week of the summit, that's when we saw a huge spike. 257 articles in total were collected during the week of the summit. And then after the summit, we saw, I mean, you can see the graph, the line going down. And at the end of our monitoring period, we were only able to collect 5 stories in that week on climate change. So this just shows you how the media prioritize climate change in terms of, vigorously reporting on it before and during. And of course, the week of the summit recorded the highest amount of coverage at 257. The type of discourse or narratives and coverage during the week of the spike was mostly on politics and economics. There was a lot of articles that were reporting on different political parties rendering their voice to climate change during the summit, and of course the BRICS summit leaders themselves, including the South African presidency. In terms of the top 5 topics, you will see that they garnered a combined coverage share of 87%. So we have about 19 climate change coded topics, and the top 5 of these garnered 87%, leaving the other small percentage for the other election coded topics. And you see from the graph that environment and politics dominated coverage. So stories that were under environment, or the topic that is coded environment, were mostly just around renewable energy and what the different governments or the different political leaders that were at the summit, the strategies that they had to mitigate climate change and its impact. So the majority of it was environment and politics, and then we had a few on war and conflict, disaster and accident, and business finance. But you will remember that in my previous slide, I did say that during the week of the spike, the coverage was mostly on politics and economics. So sadly, you cannot take away politics from an important issue such as climate change in South Africa, I guess everywhere else as well. All right, so in terms of the voices, the people who had the loudest, or the groups that had the loudest voice in our coverage, you will see that the presidency and the foreign government are topping in terms of number 1 and number 2. So we had the foreign government topping the list of most accessed or most sourced people in coverage of climate change during the BRICS summit. So foreign government, they were able to garner a voice share of 25%, forgive my eyes, 25%, followed by the presidency at 17%. Now, in coverage of an important topic such as climate change, you will agree with me again that the voice of experts should be very audible in such coverage. Sadly, we only had experts featuring in coverage of climate change at only 5%. So experts are part of the broader group where we have academicians and researchers. And this is an important group, especially to be able to unpack an issue such as a complex issue such as climate change for ordinary citizens. William did quote the Reuters report where he says people rely on news. People were found, or people say they rely on news to help them understand what's going on around us. And in coverage of climate change, it helps if the media involves critical voices that will help unpack such an issue for ordinary citizens, and including also just being able to give possible solutions to political leaders or even governments in terms of how they can address it. But sadly, this voice only got a coverage share of 5%. Gender. This is something that we've noticed that is a problem in media coverage at Media Monitoring Africa. So each and every issue or event or group that we're monitoring, we look at how women are represented in this coverage as sources. And in coverage of climate change, we had women speaking at only 14%. Sorry, I need to breathe because I've been speaking about underrepresentation of women in such issues for a long time, and it does tend to, become Yes, it's very sad. So please, we need to, I mean, we are experts and activists here and we just need to ensure that part of our messaging to the media is that they need to be deliberate about engaging women, more women as sources in coverage of any issue or any event. And for an issue such as climate change, women are seen to bear the brunt of it. So they definitely need to have a voice. They definitely need to be audible in coverage of such a topic. But sadly, they're only featured at 14% during the monitoring period, and that has to change. So I hope that can be part of our messaging to the media. Okay, so we also monitor race representation media coverage because we want to see which races are dominating in coverage, which ones are underrepresented. And what we do is that we measure the representation in coverage against the population of that particular race for us to be able to determine which race is overrepresented, if I know that there's such a case, and which race is underrepresented. And in coverage of climate change, we have the black voices dominating at 51%, followed by white voices at 31%. Sadly, we have the Asian voices and colored voices coming at 16% and 2% representation. So the 51% voice share for black voices, this comes about because if you look at affiliation, which I did speak about before, you see that foreign governments, presidency, and ANC are dominating as the top three. Presidency 17%, ANC voices at 21%. And the majority of people who are at the front speaking about such issues or even accessed mostly in media coverage from the presidency or ANC are black people. So this could have contributed to black voices dominating at 51%. And then, of course, we have on the screen the top 10 media in terms of which media in South Africa, from the ones that we monitored, are prioritizing coverage of climate change. We have Daily Maverick topping the list, followed by Fin24 and Eyewitness News. So this shows that I mean, we have the last one on the graph, on the figure at 4%. This shows that the ones that didn't make it to the top 10 had coverage of 4% and less, which means that many South African media are not reporting or prioritizing coverage on climate change. So kudos to Daily Maverick for prioritizing climate change, and of course Fin24 and Eyewitness News. To summarize, so we saw that from the first graph, we saw that there was a notable, commendable amount of coverage during the summit before and after, with the surge happening the week of the summit. However, when we dug deep, or when we analyzed the articles that we saw, or we found that climate change as an issue received less coverage. Even if there were a lot of articles or around climate change, the issue, climate change as an issue itself, did not receive the needed attention because much of the coverage was around politics, was around business, finance, was around economics, was around other issues, and climate change itself as an issue didn't receive the needed, it was not the primary focus of the narrative. And of course, we saw that government strategies and policies related to climate regulation and sustainability were dominating, or were being prioritized rather in such discourse. We also had the foreign governments and the presidency dominating the coverage, of course, with the ANC following on the third. We didn't have much representation of experts, researchers, academics, including the media and journalists, and this just shows that there was a great underrepresentation of such important voices that should be contributing to the discourse. And of course, we saw that women were underrepresented in coverage, they were not audible, and we just need we need diverse representation of different people, different races, and of course different genders in coverage. But most importantly, we just need that experts be involved in such discourse so that they are able to unpack this critical issue for ordinary citizens, because climate change should not just be a political issue or a government issue or a political parties issue. It's an issue that affects the ordinary citizens of South Africa, and they should be audible in coverage, especially the women who are usually underrepresented. Thank you so much for rendering me your ears.
Thank you so much, Lester, for that. I think we can give her another round of applause. Thank you so much. So at MMA, we have what we call Hash Play. It's a very cool online game where you can actually experience quite a diverse number of quiz questions. Now, based on one of the elements that Lester highlighted, it's only fair that I really pose this quiz question, right? I'm not sure if there's a prize or not at the end of this. When it comes to gender voices or gender representation at the media, well, looking at the media coverage that she presented on, when it comes to female voices, right, do they have a 14% share, A, B, 86% share, or C, 23% share? Who goes for A? Okay, we've got a few hands that say A. B? Okay, there's one that's 86. C? All right, we've got 23%. So the answer is 14%, and males at 86%. And I'm emphasizing this, echoing the cry that Lester spoke on ensuring that we are really leveling the plane when it comes to voices and gender representation there. Up next, I'd like to call upon Claire DeHoos, who is an amazing associate at Power and Associates. She's a legal practitioner, and we did some amazing research with them looking at climate disinformation. If you can give a round of applause.
Okay, I also should have asked how the clicker works. Sorry? Yeah. Thank you. So, my name is Claire DeHoos. I am a candidate legal practitioner at Power and Associates, and I'm here today to take you through MMA's discussion document, which is titled Climate Disinformation, Consequences and Solutions, unpacking the effects of disinformation on climate change and environmental harms. So, climate disinformation is a major threat to climate action. It hides the truth by overwhelming people with claims and questions designed in bad faith to confuse people so that climate action is delayed. Climate disinformation creates a distorted or false perception of what climate change is and what the solutions to it are. It weakens the public appetite for effective policies and actions aimed at climate change mitigation and adaptation. The amount of climate disinformation is vast, and it is compounded by social media. Various actors engage in climate disinformation to further specific goals and do so through a variety of mechanisms. The aim of this discussion document is to explain how climate disinformation erodes efforts in the fight for climate justice and undermines human rights. This discussion document aims to develop solutions to the issue of climate disinformation and highlight the importance of accurate information as an integral component of achieving climate justice. I will take you through an overview of the topics that are discussed in the document, and then spend a bit more time on what I see as the most important part, the solutions. The first section is Climate Change 101. Here, we discuss the basics of what climate change is, as well as the detrimental impacts of climate change, including on the rights to a healthy environment, to food, water, and healthcare, to life and equality, on children's rights, as well as on the right to safety and security. Then we take a look at common myths, misnomers, and misunderstandings surrounding climate change. We discuss the existing regional and international law that deals with the intersection between climate change, access to information, and freedom of expression. Next, Disinformation 101. Here we discuss what disinformation is, as well as what the general impacts of it are. We then delve into climate disinformation specifically. we discuss what climate disinformation is, the intersection between technology and the dissemination of climate disinformation, including AI and other emergent technology. We give examples of how climate disinformation is used as a way to target and silence climate activists, as well as how people with interests in the fossil fuel industry engage in climate disinformation campaigns. We show how climate disinformation is used to further political agendas, as well as, lastly in this section, the particular effects of climate disinformation on children. In the next section, we go into more detail on the impacts of climate disinformation. We show how climate disinformation, particularly when it occurs online, creates echo chambers of false information, which gives rise to climate change denial. We show how it polarizes public opinion to such extremes that it ultimately results in inaction. We show how, due to the confusion and climate defeatism that it perpetuates, it causes a lack of public participation. Lastly, in this section, we show how climate disinformation fosters distrust in the media. Lastly, we discuss the solutions to climate disinformation. Of course, there are certainly more solutions. Climate disinformation is a complex issue which requires as many creative solutions as possible. But here are just a few that we have noted. The media has a duty to provide accurate and relevant reporting on climate change issues and solutions. In order to do this, journalists must be able to identify climate disinformation. Therefore, we need training for journalists on the nuances and intricacies of climate change. Civil society could consider offering this kind of training and thereby enabling the free flow of climate information. Civil society could also consider getting or creating innovative tools for identifying and preventing climate disinformation, similar to MMA's Real 411 tool. In terms of domestic and international law, the state has a duty to meet certain climate change mitigation and adaptation goals. The state also has an obligation to enable people's rights to access to information. In order to fully realize these obligations, the state must provide climate change information that is accurate and up to date. To do so effectively, it must provide climate change education to both school-going and non-school-going portions of the population, and given the reality that the exchange of information occurs mostly online, it must promote digital literacy so that people can navigate online spaces and make informed decisions on what they see there. There is clearly a need for some regulation on how platforms deal with disinformation generally, but there needs to be a balance between mitigating the harms of climate disinformation and enabling and protecting freedom of expression. Innovative regulatory measures are needed to strike this balance. AI can be used to spread and perpetuate climate disinformation and is currently not really regulated. But again, we must be cautious of over-regulation. AI can be used as a tool to tackle climate disinformation, for example, by being used for text analysis and fact-checking, for source credibility assessments, for image and video analysis, and for network analysis. Any regulation that is put into place needs to be rooted in transparency in order to mitigate or negate the risks of bias and undue restriction on freedom of expression that AI tools may present. The last solution discussed pertains to children's rights. Internationally, there has been some development in children's rights to a clean, safe, and healthy environment and to access to information. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child last year published General Comment 26 on children's rights in the environment and stated that children have the right to access accurate and reliable information surrounding the environmental issues, and that states are obliged to protect children from misinformation concerning environmental risks. In order for children to be effectively protected against climate disinformation and for this to filter down into domestic law, more is needed. Disinformation must be directly addressed and recognized as a threat to children's rights. States must be obliged to implement measures to negate climate disinformation, and the importance of digital literacy amongst children must be emphasized. So that, in a nutshell, is the discussion document. I hope that you find it interesting and useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claire, for that. And I think the last few slides really gave us all something to ponder on, because these are really key solutions. And just to echo something that you referenced there, echo chambers of lies give rise to climate change denial. And I think it's important to actually realize the threat that disinformation poses when it comes to climate change information. Up next, we've got an MMA friend. I'm allowed to claim that, right? An old MMA friend before I give you a new position. Scotland Pamodi, who is, well, they are the program director at the New Economy Hub, which is something new that has been started. And they've been really running the show there with different initiatives around research, looking at media narratives. And I'd like to call them up to give their inputs in terms of what they've been doing and why this discussion is important for them as well. So if you can give them a huge round of applause on stage.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Namshado. I presume I'm going to press the red button, yeah? Left and right. Okay. Okay. Viva. Viva. Good morning, everyone. It's so good to be here. And thanks, Namshado. Yeah. Friend of MMA, yes, a deep friend and lover of MMA and the work that they do. It's really just so important to be, to have such a community resource or utility such as this one in our country to help us keep track of what's happening in our media, what the narratives are, and what the impact it is on representation and on representativity of the diverse polity that makes up our country, right? So thank you so much for really inviting us to be part of this partnership. And I'm really looking forward to continuing in this line going forward. You really are the best folks to be doing this kind of work, to be quite frank. Right, so like Nomshato said, as she introduced me, my name is Sigwetlane Pamodi. We'll help each other say my name. I know it's a little bit tricky for some people sometimes. It's a Sesotho name, and even Sesotho-speaking people struggle with it. So it's okay. I answer to the pronouns they and them. And I'm the program director of the New Economy Hub. So what are we? What is this New Economy Hub vibe that we've just heard of? Well, the New Economy Hub is really, again, one of these tactical tech resources. That's the idea of the initiative. We are located in the African Climate Foundation, where we have our home, but our work is not quite driven by, you know, it's directly aligned to the mandate of the ACF, but you know, we work in slightly different ways to what the foundation, in fact, quite different ways to what the foundation does. We really exist to be a community resource to communicators, strategic communicators, and campaigners to really start to help and support society to not only make sense of what is happening around the issues of the climate and development nexus, which I'll speak to presently, but also to really start amplifying the stories, issues, concerns that are actually not getting the kind of attention that they are needing as we are steamrolling the implementation of, you know, the energy transition as the first component of the overall transition or adaptation effort in response to climate change, right? So just to kind of give you a brief overview, what we really want to see overall is the idea or the reality of a decarbonized economy that is powered by an equitable energy system, and not just for its own sake, but to do the very specific work of transforming our economy and economic arrangements as we currently have them to mitigate our structural and systemic developmental challenges of racialized inequality, unemployment, and multidimensional poverty as people are experiencing it today, right? Again, climate and development nexus. This is going to be a very important phrase to keep in mind. So what we do in this context, because this is a big issue, big story, big ambition, big vision, we can only play a very small role in it, but we hope to make some impact. And the impact that we hope to make is that we really start to build a kind of critical consciousness and social demand for the practical, concrete pathways and tools and actions that will realize or contribute to realizing this vision. So we first have to start by having a conversation amongst ourselves, that it is a coherent one, that it is an evidence-based one, and then from there to start scaling this demand so that we can really approach and define these really concrete and clear policy actions on one hand, but also practical actions that are required for to respond to mitigate climate change as it's currently happening, as well as to adapt ourselves to the future that we are entering into. I think some of us may be aware that we're approaching this point of overshoot over the 1.5 to 2 degrees that was committed at the Paris commitments, and that has quite devastating and cataclysmic consequences in very practical terms for us, especially for those of us who are on the African continent, right? Now, climate change is a development problem. What do I mean by that, right? Going back to this idea of the climate and development nexus. Well, as we know, or as some of us may be aware, climate change poses really deep threats for Africa's development prospects, right? We, as a continent, and perhaps even as a country, in spite of us being a global net emitter, number 14, because of Eskom and Sasol, right, in particular. In spite of that, our continent is among the least responsible for the causes of climate change, right? Those who are responsible for this are those industrialized states in Europe, North America. We may include Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and some others in the story. But, you know, it's these industrialized states, the G8, formerly G8 countries, now G7, I suppose, who've put us in this position. We are now scrambling because we can no longer exploit our coal and oil and fossil fuel energy sources to be able to get ourselves in a similar kind of position as these industrialized states. This becomes a global justice question, right? And I think we really need to face that really face that honestly. However, we are at a juncture right now where we cannot continue burning coal and oil and gas as we have been to industrialize. And so it creates this hard limitation on our ability to develop, because without energy, no development can happen because economies can't run because they require energy, high levels of that, for that matter. And so we're going to have to ask ourselves, as we think about how do we practically transition our energy systems as a first, as a first phase of this climate responsive development trajectory that we need to be going into for planetary survival. We have to ask ourselves, well then, what is it going to take? What does it require? Where is the money going to come from, seeing as we don't have it and the industrialized states do, as an example? However, climate action really presents multiplier opportunities for our development prospects as well, right? So first of all, you know, perhaps with the exception of South Africa, perhaps with the exception of South Africa, most of Africa does not depend on coal and oil and gas as much as industrialized states do. In fact, the hard push to electrification in a context where there are these extremely low levels of electrification across the region really can benefit from the transition to renewables, in the sense that ours is not so much a mitigation imperative, preventing further emissions from going out into the atmosphere to cause global heating, right, global warming, and then having the consequence of producing climate change, these extreme weather events, patterns, etc., that we are already seeing and experiencing. Actually, ours is an adaptation course, we are adapting our energy systems, we are adapting our economies, and we are needing to adapt our infrastructure and our societies to a world where not only climate change is a reality, or climate chaos, as some have called it, is a reality, but that we are adapting our economies in ways that we can then actually harness this total transformation for our own development prospects. Here, I would like for us to think about two key things, two key levers of power that we actually have, power and potential. One, Africa has the highest estimated reserves of transition minerals, this idea that people call critical minerals. I think we should test that and contest it, in fact, because the question is critical for whom, right? So let's call them transition minerals. Lithium, cobalt, the platinum group of minerals, etc. So South Africa itself is very well placed in this regard. We have a lever of power. But we also do need this cash injection, this intellectual property or knowledge and skills injection in order for us to be able to exploit these transition minerals for our own benefit through things like beneficiation, creating these industrial value chains that really can then go towards transforming our society to respond to our structural and systemic problems of racialized inequality, unemployment, and multidimensional poverty. Practical things, right? Secondly, Africa, and I include South Africa here, and I think we should, to bring it home, closer to home, has some of the highest, best resources in terms of these natural or renewable energy inputs, right? So I'm talking about solar energy, I'm talking about wind energy, right? But we're not moving as quickly as we need to be in terms of transforming our energy system and transforming the regulatory environment, as well as the various industrial value chains, not only transforming them, but kickstarting them, to be able then to really leverage these critical opportunities, these ripe and ready opportunities that we have in our hands all around us, to be able to adapt ourselves and our economies and our development trajectory, the critical thing, to climate change. And so for me, and I hope increasingly for yourselves, climate change stops being just an angle to the story. It in fact becomes the story of our lives. It is at the heart of everything about what we do in our society. How is climate change going to impact on issues such as health? In light of the various implications that heating is going to cause to health outcomes, particularly for pregnant women and infants, what the implications of extreme weather patterns such as high rainfall, as we've been seeing on our eastern seaboard, will have on things like infrastructure, roads, ports, housing, and so forth. How do we adapt to that? What does climate change mean in terms of our economic prospects, which pay for the stuff that our society so depends on, the public goods and services that our society depends on so much, such as public health, public education, and so forth? Right now, the EU is already implementing the first phase of its carbon border adjustment tax, right, the CBAM measure, right? This is billed as a prompt to all of the EU's trade partners to start not only recording but also reducing their embedded carbon levels in their products that they export to the EU. So there's a tax attached to that to disincentivize embedded carbon. But at the same time, it directly means, particularly for us developing and middle-income economies that still depend on coal and fossil fuels in order to be able to dig out, process, and then move the core commodities that we share, that we sell to these trade partners. I'm talking about carbon steel, I'm talking about aluminium, the platinum group of metals, in fact, all of our mineral resources. I'm talking about agriculture, agricultural products, and so forth. These are all the key things that we trade with the EU. That means that now there is a trade barrier between ourselves, while they are also now developing their own internal markets, market protectionism. So this raises further questions around, well, what will this mean for our development prospects? And so we have to start really thinking and attuning ourselves to what are the implications of climate change beyond the weather on our society, and what are the practical things that we need to do. Now, in the 2 minutes that I have on my timer, because I was given 15 minutes, I'm going to whiz through some of the indicative results that have emerged from some of the narratives research that we've done. We've done a similar exercise as what MMA has done. Our methodology is slightly different, where MMA has used a human rights-focused lens. We've taken a corporate reputation measurement perspective to it. And so the results are going to look slightly different because we've been looking for quite different things, right? Where MMA has focused in terms of what they've presented to us here on the what happened around during and around BRICS, the BRICS summit. We have focused on what happened in 2020, 2022, because 2021 was a dud year. We were all locked down at home, focused almost only on COVID, and then on 2023. Incidentally, these are also the key moments that South Africa has been really forming, shaping, and communicating its positions on climate and its actions and commitments around these. So, what did we do? We collected about in 2022, we collected about 140,788 clips. In 2022, about 207 clips. And then in 2023, from April to September, about 46,138 clips, right? So already you see a huge disjuncture in terms of the numbers. Why? Because we looked at everything from news and analysis, as well as opinions. We looked at consumer media, as well as business-to-business media, right? Around how are they talking about this story. Further to that, we looked at broadcast, online, and print. The first thing that we should really pay attention to here, I think, is that, firstly, online has the overall share of voice in terms of output, right, across the board. We do have high levels of internet access in our country, but most of that is through mobile broadband, right? So you're not doing it through your computer, you're doing it through your phone, which raises questions around, well, what can and can't you access with any real meaningful, with any real depth on your mobile? But, in South Africa, we have a very well-developed online media ecosystem. It's responsive to whatever device you're working on. But then the question is then, well, paywalls, what do we do about that? What about people who can't afford those media, right? On print, you see is the second contender, with the exception of 2023 is like really one of, among the lowest. But then, of course, when you look at the broadcast component, this is where the overwhelming majority of our society actually get their news and information from. Overwhelming majority. It's the least represented in terms of output. Why? How deeply is the story being reported? Right. So the chart there the charts that you're looking at there, the three charts, 2020, 22, and 23, April to September, you start to see that the coverage is mainly of national relevance. That's what the blue markings are. So the climate story is a national story. We don't know very much about what's happening in the blue represents regions or provinces, right? We don't really know what's happening in terms of the impact on these various provinces. And then when you look even further at the community level, they're doing slightly better there in 2020, but then for the rest of it, really the lowest. There's no community media there's very little media of relevance or coverage of relevance at a local community level. Now, I ask the question when we reflect on the frequent rain bombs that have been hitting our eastern seaboard, particularly KZN. What does this mean in terms of the people who are living in KZN and perhaps living in rural KZN who only access African language media and want to know about how to respond to the story that is impacting them directly and so deeply and profoundly? What does it mean when the story is one of national relevance rather than of regional and local relevance? Where am I pointing this thing? Yeah. Please forgive me. So when we took our keywords, we then started to aggregate them to kind of just get a sense of like, what are these stories actually about, or these items? Let me talk about items, right? Because we also include business-to-business media, we include consumer media, etc. In that, it's not just news and information services, you know, in the traditional sense. There are 5 kind of broad categories here, or themes: climate change and impacts, climate and economy, climate governance, where we're going to get that money from, right? Because it's not our fault and we can't be left on our own. And then, of course, energy and resource management, the load shedding story, right? Because these two have been co-located. What we start to see then is that, oh, there we go, thank you. What we see is that the climate impact, conforming or consistently with what MMA has reported to us already, climate and its impacts is the highest reported, right? Great, wonderful, good. That's what we want to see more of, but we do need to kind of granularize it even further. But when you look at the far end there, we start to see that the energy and resource management is what follows very quickly. The load shedding story, which has been co-located with climate change, right? We have to go embark on this energy transition because of climate change, yes. Load shedding is now happening because of not because of climate change, but because of the so-called just transition, which is not just, quote unquote, right? So there's confusion around what actually is happening. The causes of load shedding, the causes of the energy the causes of the coal plant closures, always inevitable. The conflation with the energy transition that has to happen as a consequence of climate change and the need to mitigate and adapt our energy system for the sake of our economy, right? That becomes the next highest reported. What we actually start to see when we unroll the climate impact data is that actually that story is being told not only through the idea of the consequences of the extreme weather impacts. It's actually that there's an alignment between the climate impact being understood as also an energy and resource management sort of issue or question, right? So climate change and its impacts are largely in terms of the way the story is being told, an energy and resource management issue. And then going even deeper is actually an economy story, a macroeconomic story. So the idea here is that climate change and the action that is happening around climate change in South Africa, the so-called just transition, right, is part and parcel of this issue around what's happening in terms of the management of the load shedding question and our energy security crisis. And as a result of that, we now have to be really thinking about, well, then what are the deeper impacts from this perspective on things like manufacturing, on mining, on these high energy or these energy intensive user groups, right? As opposed to really thinking about what are the real and direct implications on people, on society, on what we need to plan on the development questions. Whizzing through it. How is the climate story being told? What you're seeing there is a chart around the sentiments, right? It's a sentiment analysis. Green green is around what is seen as positive sentiment, right? How the story is being told in a positive sort of way where there's an acknowledgement and an agreement with the content, a positioning of the story to help people to understand that this thing is here, is real, is happening, right? And then we start to see, then the blue there is around what is balanced reporting, right? Pros and cons, what is difficult to accept about our situation, where do the opportunities lie, what are the risks, and so forth. What is the yellow there is around the neutral coverage, so basically the journalism. A press statement gets released and then it just gets packaged as it was. This one said this one said that, and then there we go. There you have it. That's the story. And then red is the negative coverage, the coverage that typically is associated with the denialist perspective, right? Or the story that's associated with the energy transition work being a wrong thing to do in the context of our energy security crisis, as another example. Overall, what you can see here for 2020, 2022, and 6 months of 2023 is that the coverage is actually positive to neutral, right? Or neutral to positive. Let's work it that way. So it's that not. So media are either producing journalism, not providing any in-depth analysis, balanced perspectives and views, or they are largely in agreement with the science, the interventions that need to be made based on the scientific consensus, and are trying to get us to push on this climate responsive development course as a society. So on one hand, quite encouraging, right? But on the other, there's some concern because that yellow is mighty large, right? And it also indicates, perhaps for me, that maybe media are needing a little bit of support in terms of making sense of the story in order to support the sense-making in society, right? And perhaps then that's where we will start to see that shift from yellow as a dominant to a green. Another thing that we need to pay attention to there is that broadcast is doing the most journalism. That's broadcast TV and radio. And we really need to be worried because this is where most people access their media, their news and information and critical perspectives around, how to understand the climate story. Leading outlets, again, we see it's online, print, and then only broadcast. On online mining and engineering news, the creamer media publications, the business-to-business media publications, they are knocking it out of the park, hands down. And then when we look at the print level, again, Mining and Engineering News Weekly, or Engineering News and Mining Weekly leads for 2020, and then Business Day, and then so it goes to Cape Times, The Star, and then What Now. And then when you go across to the broadcast, that first block again, it's all quite consistently low. It doesn't even warrant kind of saying who's leading and who isn't. And these dynamics are quite consistent across the board, with the exception of Daily Maverick starting to rise up the ranks in terms of their coverage online, right? And I think this is credit to This Burning Planet and that initiative there. And then once again, in 2023, in that period, April to September, we see that the Daily Maverick now leads, followed by independent media, right? The group and the relatively high levels of output that they've produced in that period. Now, who are the leading voices? Again, now this is an order of procession. The creamer media folks are leading outright, right? And I think when you also look at their content, it does provide really balanced, critical, reflective, contextualizing kind of content. These are people who are engaged with their audiences, their readers, the people that they are serving, right? Business-to-business media and policy influencers. And they really are wanting to get these folks to understand the story. In terms of the sentiment, they also have the highest in terms of positive to balanced sentiment as well. So maybe our media could be learning quite a bit from them, and also, we could also all be learning from them in terms of what is the response that we offer, and how do we think about it. And then we get to Siphelele Dludla, overall, from independent media, overall the next person who leads the coverage, largely kind of the energy security story, but increasingly, the climate sustainability perspective as well. There's been a hard push from the independent media in this regard. And then lastly, Lamise Umaji, who's the sustainability reporter at News 24 across the group, right? Now, there are 4 challenges, and I'll close here. There are 4 key challenges that I think we really need to pay attention to. 1, climate change, well, according to our data, indicative, climate change coverage is narrowly focused on energy security, the economy, and the technical and policy initiatives that need to respond to this. How do we get the renewables online and into the grid as quickly as possible to secure energy security, to address our energy security crisis, and then and in so doing address our contribution to the climate emergency that we are in. The intersection with social impact and development concerns is next to nowhere. Deep concern. Second, the story is simply not reaching significant proportions of our society. It's really very troubling, right? When we publish our report, there'll be a chart there that shows you how the story actually, the climate story, according to where where the media is published, where it comes from, whom it represents, is actually happening between the Western Cape and Gauteng. That's where the climate story in South Africa is really happening, and everywhere else not so much. That's really worrying, given that the most profoundly affected folks are actually people who are living on the eastern seaboard, as well as those who are living on the eastern seaboard, and also those dry parts of the interior. So this is the Karoo area, the Northern Cape, and parts of the Eastern Cape, and they're also largely rural agrarian communities. So what are we going to do about them? Why are they not reflected in the story? And why are they not represented in the climate story? So the issue here is that there's an over-representation of the needs of English-speaking, urban-based, elite audiences. The idea is that they are policy influencers. This is the inference that we draw, that they're policy influencers, they're proximate to the state and government, and therefore, and also have deep economic interests in the stabilization, in shaping our national policy agenda and the stabilization of our energy security crisis. And so that's why, that's part of the reason of why the attention is there. Of course, there are also the practical considerations that this is where our media are, and they don't have the resources to reach everywhere across the country, with perhaps the exception of the SABC. And so we should be asking ourselves this question as well: where's our national public broadcaster on this story? The story is told almost exclusively in English, right? I reflected on that a little bit in speaking about the previous slide. You know, 91.9% of this country doesn't speak English, of households, I mean, in this country, doesn't speak English as a primary language in their households. So who is being attended to in the telling of the story? Who is being served in the telling of the story? Who is contemplated as being impacted by the story? Lastly, and this is about hard realities, given the news that we received late last week. You know, the systemic constraints on media viability and sustainability in South Africa means we have too few journalists. It beggars belief for me that, you know, the creamer media folks are producing the highest, most critical, most in-depth coverage across those three periods that we assess. Beggars belief. But nevertheless, it is our reality because of what's happening in terms of the systemic challenges and constraints that our media are faced with. And so they can't reach these audiences that I've spoken to who are excluded from the story, and how the story, you know, and who's being contemplated as being directly affected and impacted by the story. And so we have to start thinking a little bit critically around what we do around that. And then lastly, where the story is not positioned as an energy and an economy story, it's just an environmental sustainability story. You know, it's sitting there in that corner. It's not telling us or reminding us that when a rain bomb hits KZN, people who are living in those parts which are worst affected are unable to leave those areas to access public healthcare services, to keep up with their chronic care checkups and medication, for instance. What does that mean in terms of health outcomes? What does it mean in terms of health outcomes if we continue to burn coal and start to deploy gas as hard as we are doing in places that have long been affected by this, the sacrifice zones of the Vaal Triangle or the Mpumalanga coal belt? What is the implications of burning this fossil fuel energy on those communities and on the fiscus, when we could actually be thinking very practically and ambitiously around how do we leverage this moment and leverage the transition in order to improve health outcomes and the cost to the economy and society and to people, most especially around this. I could go at length around what the various perspectives and angles of the climate story could be, where it's at the center, as opposed to it's being defined in itself as an angle. But we can have that conversation a little bit further. Nomshado, thanks for your abiding patience.
Thank you so much for that, Sikwetlani. Did I say it correctly? Thank you. So I'm re-emphasizing it so that we all, you know, when we meet them during tea break, we can actually say the name correctly. So we'll keep practicing. But there's key things, and I think our next speaker is really coming in at a great moment and ending from your presentation, touching on, you know, the role of the media, but the realities that they're facing as well. But also, you know, highlighting how we amplifying the key voices and bringing them into the conversation, those on-the-ground community voices that need to be part of the conversation in terms of addressing concerns and helping them understand what do we mean by climate change and how does this impact their daily lives. So up next, I'd like to bring Reggie Mwalusi, who's the Executive Director at SA National Editors Forum, also known as SENEF. And basically what he'll be doing is kind of speaking to some of the key points that were pointed out by the different speakers, but also kind of laying out the context of where is media currently right now when it comes to the issues of sustainability and capacity to be able to actually, you know, implement the solutions that most of our speakers and presenters have already alluded to. So if you can please give him a round of applause. I wish I could play a nice song for you since you are coming all the way from the front.
Thanks a lot, Nomshado. Good morning. Thanks for having me here. Someone said to me last week, they looked at me and said, "Oh, you still around? Thought you guys are extinct since journalists are disappearing so fast." So yeah, we're still around. Some of us are still left. Yeah. So 15 years ago, I was among the, 15,000 journalists that South Africa had. And today I'm standing here among the less than 4,500. So that number, the rest are gone. Where did they go? Well, they lost their jobs. They are at home. They're no longer working. It's been retrenchments. It's been everything. As you may have seen, everyone has been referring to last week, but we also saw last year when Pretoria News closed after, 125 years? A very monumental newspaper that when I studied in the capital city, we used to use it as a reference. The Weekend Post also closed after, 8 years? And those journalists lost their jobs. And what it simply means is that, you know, the diversity, the plurality of voices that we always emphasize on as an organization, those are gone. So now when one of the titles we've been referring to being closed by Media 24 last week, you then had a chat with two of the editors of those titles, and they were saying to me, "Look, Rich, we're not, it is what it is. But the reality is that our KPIs, standing here, talking to you, our KPIs are not print. Instead, what you see in print has been taken from digital. Digital is the first priority in terms of the work that we do. We are digital first. But the question as well, when you speak to editors, you can be digital first all you like, but digital first still does not cover the revenues that you need. As we know, if you have owned a business, one of the most expensive overhead you can have in any business is your salaries. So that's what's been faced. I used to be the editor of the Daily Sun. When I left the Daily Sun, that's 5 years back, I had a newsroom of about 70 staff members. The Daily Sun to this day is left with 12 staff members. So to produce the paper. So you just get into that the picture of what the situation is at. And you look at broadcast, Sekwetlane, up the road here, the SABC is not in good shape. People always say the SABC has to be everywhere. Unfortunately not. The SABC can't be everywhere. We're standing here today, the SABC owes Centec 1.3 billion that they have to pay. The head of news at the SABC is always telling me he has to consistently look at his budget and cut the budget. We look at community media that's supposed to cover and have those voices in terms of indigenous languages. Community media, we have lost close to, during COVID, post-COVID, we have lost close to what? 80 to 100 community radio stations because of the monies they owe to Centec. So if you owe Centec and you can't pay Centec, they do a simple thing. They cut the signal. When the signal is cut, there's nothing that you can do. So yeah, so that's where we at, colleagues. And climate change is it's an important topic. And while it's an important topic for where we're standing as a media, if you are going to ask me as an editor and you say to me, we can discuss this and debate it. If you are going to ask me as an editor and you say, if you've got resources and you want to invest these resources in your newsroom, which beat would you focus on? And unfortunately, climate change won't be the beat. If you say, out of all the resources, I'm going to say to you, I think I need to invest more in investigative journalism, which is something that has gone down in terms of, if you look at the reporting across South Africa. You look at, yes, we need to report on the climate question, on the climate issue. You look at what happened in KZN, and you read the weekend papers at the weekend, and when you pick up the Sunday Times, you read a beautiful story of someone who lost his house due to the tornadoes. But this man was preparing for the Comrades Marathon, and he was targeting a sub-10, and with all the support, he still managed, to wake up and go run that story. So it's a human element story, also interfaced with the issue of climate change. But Claire earlier on touched on the need for CSOs to also invest in the training of journalists, particularly on climate disinformation. Yes, the training is needed, but much as also we need the training, the question is, as an organization that's anchoring the training of journalists in South Africa, and we look at the CSOs funding models, all of us are currently constrained in terms of funding. Because if you look at funding across the world and you speak to guys, organizations like your Open Society Foundations and all of that, they'll tell you that, yes, we are cutting, and you guys across the continent, you need to compete with the rest. So the big question then is, where will the money come from this for this training of journalists, so that they can cover issues pertaining to climate change? And someone would say it has to come from the private sector. But I always have this conversation, and it's a conversation I was also having with Sekwetlane earlier, to say, when we cover the private sector, are there no expectations? Do we really need that money? And you can have one or two private sector companies that say, yeah, we'll invest, we'll support you, like what we do as SANEF. We do get funding a lot from the private sector, but we're always clear to say, much as we get funding from us, that funding does not mean you're going to get any positive coverage. But it's not the case here at home with each and every private sector company. So it's a catch-22 situation. But what we know and what we realize is that there's a need for that training, and there's a need for more coverage. But more coverage how? Because what we have now in our newsrooms, we've got young journalists, and those young journalists, we always emphasize to them that there's nothing called you covering a beat and focusing on one thing. So we have a journalist now saying to the journalist, please check on what's happening with Banyana, the latest there. They're supposed to be preparing for the Olympics. Once she's done with that story, we say, there's a business story on the go, blah, blah, blah company has financial results, you need to go there. When they come back, get ready for the presidential inauguration tomorrow. Once they're done with that story, we say to them, there's a general story of crime wherever, in the CBD. Get ready to go cover that story. So you realize how many topics I've just said. And you are talking to a 22-year-old who's supposed to understand all those issues in that newsroom. So the reality is that the newsroom has, with all these other journalists who have lost, there's been a huge chunk of senior journalists who left the newsrooms for one reason or the other, private sector and government. That didn't help the situation, but it is the reality. So once we start talking, and we can ventilate this further, once we start talking how the sustainability of the media, which is a topic that we are having internally as SANEF, to say we are going to establish what we call a journalism sustainability fund. But once we establish that fund as an organization, it's not a fund where we say it's a free for all. One of the things that we've been doing, particularly for community media, is to say we need to teach them the revenue models. We need to teach them, as we say to them, digitize your newsroom. But digitizing your newsroom is also, where is the money? Go find the money so that you sustain yourself, which is not a topic most journalists are familiar with when it comes to money. Journalists just don't want to talk about money. You have a few that want to talk about money, but not all of them. So that's the one part. The other part of the fund is where you get companies like your big tech coming to us as SANEF and saying, but you don't want money. The likes of your management committee, Reggie and them, you're quite cheeky. We came to you dangling a carrot of several millions, but it doesn't work that way, not with us. Not with us. We may be desperate. You may have seen what we are doing with the Competition Commission, because we believe as an industry we need to get what's due to us. And what's due to us is not what has been offered. So that's the one part. The sustainability part is also that fund that I just spoke about. It's a fund where we really say, look, here's a fund, and how to run this fund in terms of giving these journalists and media houses grants, in terms of giving them the funding, but the funding that they can use to say this is how they are going to expand their businesses and all of that. So going back to the issue of climate change, really, it's a bit that's important. It's a bit that gets reported in by our media as a by the way. There's a tornado in KZN reported. The Minister Siweya has released a state of disaster for Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. It's a press release. It is what it is. You know, we report that because those resources are not there. And I wrote in the Sunday Times this past Sunday to say South Africans have a funny way, actually. And I called it out to say, you care about this democracy. If you care about it, you are not going to let this media go to the wall. Because if South Africans are not going to support journalism and the media out there, as we have seen, then we're good as done in terms of our constitutional democracy. We're good as done. If you realize, if you look and observe where most countries, particularly also on our continent and everywhere, where they've gone, where the media ceased to be as robust and as vigorous as it should. Newspapers, I mean, I'm not going to, I was saying to Monli, City Press and Amos Dailies, and I was saying to them, we shouldn't harbor on what we have lost in terms of the ABCs. The ABCs are the ABCs. It's circulation, it's print. We knew this day was coming. We knew it. We knew it was coming. So let's not wake up and act surprised. We knew the day was coming. We have always known. We have known, you can argue as far back as 10 years ago. We knew the day was coming. So we can't harp on that. But what we can harp on is that journalism is not dying. And what we can harp on is how we're going to adapt and do this thing freely. And what we can harp on is to wake up and say, why are South Africans and less South Africans not supporting the media as they should? Why are they not? How come a credible news channel like the SABC which is there and reporting as it should over the years. And in the past year, if you look at their latest AFS, in the past year, they lost 40% of subscribers. And then someone in that conversation we had last week said to me, but you guys are not trustworthy. And I understand we're not trustworthy. South Africa, there's an issue of trust for people to engage with the media. There's an issue of trust, particularly why we're here today. There's also been an issue of trust to say, these guys are reporting about a tornado, but is this really KZN? There's that as well. But when you look at that, we say we are not sitting here disregarding what the Edelman Trust Barometer says, which puts us as the media at number 3. It says government is number 1 in South Africa, second is business, then you have the media at the 3rd spot. But while we have that, we then have to say, but isn't the media showing some signs of trying to regain the trust? It's a trust that has been lost for various reasons. But if you say, I don't trust the media, so I'm not going to engage anyhow with the media, then who are you engaging with? You know, and what kind of a constitutional democracy, what kind of a 7th administration that you want to see if you are not going to support this media and you are not going to do anything about it? So yeah, so I think it's a conversation for the rest of the morning that we can have and we can unpack. I think with organizations like your MMA, we agree on issues of disinformation, how we are fighting that and how the efforts MMA is putting and us supporting those efforts. But also, we need to ventilate the issue of sustainability. We need to accept when we leave here to say, yeah, there's few boots on the ground, and those few boots of journalists on the ground, can they be everywhere? Unfortunately not. So that era, we have sort of gone past the era. But what we know is that the few that are still there, if you look out there, the few that are still out there, they're doing a lot. They're doing a lot of what they can in terms of reporting, in terms of being out there. You can, the criticism that we normally get, which is fair enough, is that as South African journalists, we like focusing on the one big news story, and we do that quite sometimes badly. Where you say, like William was saying earlier, where you say tomorrow is a presidential inauguration, and each and every journalist that you need, all of us are in Pretoria at this one news story, and we ignoring the rest of the stories. It's a criticism that we have to take up and say, yeah, perhaps we need to do a self-introspection here. So yeah, so I think that's me, Nomshado, and that's where we at, where we really am looking forward to hearing from you and, you know, having this discussion on what next, what can we do better, what can we do better, and how best to sustain this media. Thanks, Nomshado.
Thank you, Reggie, for that. That is quite a hot seat that you find yourself in. But the hope is that after the tea break that we're about to go into now, is that all the comments and questions that you've been holding on to, it's an opportunity for you to actually now engage with the panel based on the different findings and comments that they've made, rather. So it's really about us having a robust engagement and hearing from you. What do you think based on what you heard, but also maybe any input and solutions that you have? Because the big question is really how, right? How do we get to the realization or the reality that we're trying to get to or envision? So currently right now, it is 11:43. We are running about 10 minutes late. I am going to ensure that we finish on time. I'd like to believe my timekeeping skills will be very excellent after the tea break. So we will be definitely going out for lunch at 1 o'clock on the dot. So currently you have until 10 to 12. Until, let's say, 11:55. Is that enough time? Or should we say 12 on the dot? It's perfect time. Okay, amazing. Now I need to get consensus so that you're not saying I'm cutting you short. So we're going to come back at 11:55 on the dot for the panel where we're going to engage. I know it's going to be very tempting to kind of lay out all your comments during the tea break, but please hold them
so that we can also all hear your different thoughts and questions. Please help yourself to some coffee. There are some nibbles there that have been put out for you. Grab those, and obviously, yeah, we'll come back here at exactly 11:55. Thank you so much.
Tandy. Our head of programs, so she'll be speaking to some of the pointers that William touched on and as well that Lester touched on in terms of findings. So if I can call upon Tandy, Svetlana, and Reggie, please, to the stage. Please give them a round of applause while they deserve it. All right, I think while they're getting up here, are there any questions or comments? I mean, we had quite a lot to consume at our first session. So if there's any comments or questions, you can kindly just raise your hands because that's what we're going to be entering the panel with. So any comments or questions? I do have a colleague who's running around with a mic, so if you could kindly raise your hands if you do have one, the gentleman. Please also introduce yourself so we do know. Thank you so much.
Morning, my name is Mr. Patel, with School Governance. I'm following the debate on the climate change, just energy transition. In the research, I must commend it. It has been quite in terms of methodology. But one of the core stakeholder groupings that I think was omitted was labor, because within the kind of just energy transition debates, the core stakeholder is labor, especially unions working in extractives, mining. And their position is a very interesting position, but I haven't seen that come through in the research. And they are core stakeholder. More specifically, all the labor unions, all the federations have embraced climate change, generally broadly support the just energy transition. There's been tons of research there. But there is a lots of nuance in the pace, the nature, the mode of the transition. And I think that story is not aptly amplified, it's not covered. And because the voices of labor is marginalized in the debates on the just energy transition, we find that the resistance now is coming, especially with job losses in mining. In the first quarter of this year, 12,000 mining jobs have been lost, retrenchments in the big mining houses. And the story is highly amplified. Just energy transition is one component. But there's another story, which is the production of automation, etc., etc. So those debates be amplified in the media coverage.
Thank you so much for that. Is there any other comment or question? Thank you. There's a gentleman there.
My name is Johnny from the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce. The question that I have actually for Sanef. You cannot divorce the narrative about Africa with the climate story. Basically, kind of the backdrop is actually Africa. There is a very powerful statement by a Nigerian author. His name is Ben Okri. He says, a people are as healthy and confident as the stories they tell themselves. He then goes on further to say that bad storytellers make the people sick. Bad storytellers make the nation sick. So who controls the African narrative, right? What is the African story? Who controls the story? Because once you understand that, is it a story that is driven by funders who have a particular agenda? Because I am the Ford Foundation, I want this story told about Africa. And we need to know for sure that the person who feeds you controls you. Who's driving this narrative? That's the first question. The second question is, I'm a creative. I'm in the film and TV space. What role, if any, do you think the creative sector plays in amplifying the message, especially the narrative around climate change and all of that? There was a film on Netflix called Don't Look Up. So how can we kind of infuse the narrative of, because this is a crisis, basically affecting everyone. What role do you think the creative sector can play in amplifying this particular message? Because if it's controlled by funders, external funders, by the way, they have an agenda. How do we change that? And how do we kind of mobilize resources from within the continent so that we can balance the space? Thank you.
There's another hand over there. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Nonde Machandana, and I'm from Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies. So we actually would like to understand how, with all the research that you guys, and the research that we do on green economy, just transition issues, how is it that the media really does not have the capacity to firstly understand, you know, some of the key issues, the complexities of, you know, what is green hydrogen, what is the terminology, and as you spoke about some of the language barriers, some of the digital literacy issues in our country, and the deep digital divide. How do we work with media to ensure that we, for instance, have, you're talking about a movie that is on Netflix. We have a documentary called Voices Under the Dark Cloud, which speaks directly to the Mpumalanga transition of the decommissioning of the coal mines and how that society and that community has been impacted. This is their story at the grassroots level, but it has no traction in the conventional media. And so how are we as, and I think it was an important point made by the New Economy Hub on how, from the gentleman who spoke about the lack of labor as well as the lack of some key stakeholders such as the research tanks who are doing all of this research on the ground, really making, you know, strides in making this research public. It's actually public. It's not even research that you have to commission or ask for. On our websites, on all of these think tank websites, we get, our documentary is actually been nominated at a French film festival instead of the South African media. What is the disconnect between our South African media and really getting us a grasp of the issues and how critical this is and how vulnerable our communities are actually going to be at the end of this? I mean, we are also partnering with the African Climate Foundation recently to open up a Just Transition Labor Center with COSATU. So we're making quite inroads in involving labor, to your question, but how is it that there isn't alignment? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I don't know if, okay, there's a burning one I saw there. We'll take your hand and then we'll just give the panel a chance to respond. Please go ahead.
I had a brief discussion during the break with Sekotlana, and also following on from some of the stuff that Reggie said. Just to put it into context, I'm from the SABC, and I think that broadcasting and the SABC in particular doesn't look great in the numbers that you guys have think, and I think that that's absolutely correct and absolutely justified. Our newsroom is in a very difficult position. There's been so much politics over the last few months in particular that it's very difficult to get the story in between all of the other stuff. I mean, for example, tomorrow, there's no ways I'm writing a climate change story tomorrow because it's just not going to see the light of day. And we have that issue, but the SABC at the same time is in a position probably like no other media organization to get the story out, particularly in vernacular languages that we've been talking about, and into rural communities that we've been talking about where the story just doesn't get to. But I'm putting that into the context of the fact that we've just had an election, and I did a piece just before the elections looking at some of the major parties and a few of the smaller ones and how much climate change was in their manifestos, and it's next to zero. Load shedding is there. how to fix load shedding. That's as close as they get to looking at the climate change issue. And I read a story last week, I think it was in The Guardian, looking at all of the elections that are happening all over the world this year. It's a big election year. And climate change is not an election issue anywhere in the world. And somehow we need to find a way to actually change that, to actually push the issue as a political issue, and not just it's something that bothers people, or it's just about whether I've got electricity today or not. And at the moment, I think in South Africa, that's the story. It's about load shedding. People aren't looking further and more in depth at that. And I'm not sure how we can all kind of work together to actually do something about that. I mean, yes, I'm possibly in a position where hopefully I can try and push that, and I'll certainly see if I can do it. It's nice to have statistics that back it up. I'm not sure if I have a question in this. It's just a comment that I make. How do we move the climate change story away from just being about power generation?
Thank you so much for that. And I think there are key themes that are really coming out from the comments and questions around collaboration, but also how do we push climate change to be the narrative on the agenda. I want to start with the labor question, the exclusion of that, or rather even the emphasis of, from a research element. I think that's the primary focus as to what have you been seeing there, but also why the exclusion of labor. I think I'll give it to you, Svetlana, and maybe Thandi, if you want to touch on that one as well. Ooh, sorry. It did wake us up. I'm hoping that it is sorted. If I could just get an indication on that.
Sure. Let's try this again. How's that sounding?
Sorry for your ears.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks for the question from. I didn't catch their first name, but
Wits Business School, but yeah.
I'm presuming the representative from the Wits School of Governance. Look, I think this just goes further to underscore my point about how climate is this an economy story, or it's a environment and sustainability story elsewhere, when it is in fact such a deep, complex, multifaceted story about everyday matters of governance and development, right? So, our research didn't really go to look at, which specific constituencies are represented. It went to look at how are media telling the story across the board, what are the sentiments, what are the kinds of trends that we are picking up as a result. Of course, there are limitations, like, you're not going to get labor unless you code for labor, right? If you are, when you inform the algorithm to kind of like pick up all the stories based on all of the repositories, etc., which enable us to do this monitoring, for instance. So we really do need to be paying attention to that. And my hopes, personally, is that we will be able to phase into that kind of an approach where, we can really granularize, say, like, let's understand how the media story is being told. I mean, the labor story is being told through climate, or the climate story is being told through labor, vis-a-vis how is the climate health story being told? Who's contemplated in it? Is it just the sacrificed zones, the sacrificed carbon-intensive zones and people, right? Mpumalanga Cobalt and the Vaal Triangle, or should we also, or could we also be looking at things like how is heating going to be affecting high child and women's mortality rate areas as well. So the point that I really just want to kind of communicate here is this. If we place climate at the center of the story and really just regard it as the story, it changes the paradigm in a very fundamental kind of way, because when we engage the politics, elections, the cabinet, what goes on in the Houses of Parliament, it prompts us to start asking the critical question of what are the kinds of decisions that are being made when we are approaching overshoot. I don't know if we've had a look at the IPCC reports, the last cycle reports, those would have come out in about early to mid 2023. The WWF has done really fabulous work of kind of unrolling the big picture issues. They've developed this extraordinary graphic that tells us, that shows us what happens in terms of not just heating, but also, you know, human habitability of this planet, what it means then for animals that we share this planet with, what it means for the plant, for the ecology that we exist in and with, and what that ultimately then cascades into with respect to how our, not just our earth systems, but our economic systems actually function. It really takes it down to people. And I think if you see that image, it shows us what happens when it's a 1 degree shift. You know, we can still tolerate that, but it's not going to be good, as we're already seeing. It shows us what happens when we meet that 1.5 to 2 degrees, or when we stay just beneath that. And that's the commitment that happened in Paris. And then it shows us what happens beyond that. And it is really terrifying. And what's even more terrifying is the period of time, its intergenerational impacts. Over a period of anything from about 80 to plus 200 years, depending on which, you know, which point of the thresholds we cross, that we have to live with those conditions, right? And the significant thing for me here is that, yes, labor, yes, now, yes, food on the table now, and we need to be thinking about those dynamics. It's a critical aspect of the climate governance and development considerations that we need to be making. However, there's a far bigger picture and a far bigger story at play here that directly impacts on those kinds of constituencies alongside a whole slew of others. And that's going to shape how the story is being told and which constituencies should perhaps be visibilized even greater as we tell the story, as we kind of cross the key decision-making thresholds that we have to in this very rapid transition that we are making. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Tandy, would you like to add?
Yeah. No, I'm going to use this mic. I'm too scared to try and turn on my own one. This one's at least working. Yeah, I think, you know, I'm really glad that you ended with the point that you did, because I think it is about making that shift from focusing, when we do talk about issues around climate change, making that transition from focusing on politics, on economics, on the key decision-making issues, to how we bring in, or how media focuses and brings in voices of ordinary people. And that's where we are talking about labor as a stakeholder, unions as a stakeholder. And it doesn't just stop with, you know, lacking voices in the topic of climate change, but we see this as a trend with various big issues that we talk about. I mean, we've just gone through our election period, and we see very similar trends. Our media tend to focus on politics, on business and economics, and we really do struggle to bring in voices of ordinary people and how these big issues impact ordinary voices. So I think that, you know, the comment that was made is absolutely spot on. We don't hear these voices and really key stakeholders coming through in the conversation, because we're still so very focused on the politics of it all and the decision making, which, you know, I think we need to go through, because we're not there yet. As we also heard, climate change hasn't even been a focus or a topic in political party manifestos. And so I think we do actually have a very long way to go, but we don't have the time to get there. One of the other points, just as a, you know, that sort of linked to this conversation, is an interesting sort of case, if you would like to call it that. We all know that Shell is busy leaving, or has left, or, you know, I'm not too sure of the exact position. And we've seen this being covered a lot in the media, and we've seen it being covered
very much from a political, legislative, and economic perspective, but we've barely seen it come out as a climate change issue. And Shell being one of the biggest contributors to the CO2 issues, but how have we not picked this up as a massive climate change issue and beneficial for climate change in the country and on the continent? So there's definitely a disconnect there between bridging the gap of having this conversation at a legislative and political level to having the conversation at a very ordinary level. And that's where I think that we can also look at the role of storytelling and filmmakers and the documentaries. If we're missing the mark as mainstream media on these issues, that's where you do really, where you have the platforms to tell these stories. But I don't have the answer around why we're not tapping into the content that we very clearly already have. Maybe we can talk about that more in the room, but there's absolutely the opportunity. We want to bring in real ordinary voices and how this impacts. We have the industry to do that.
Thank you so much, Tanya, on that. And I think I'm moving to you, Reggie. I mean, it is a global issue, and we've been zoning into Africa, particularly South Africa, as the context has been going with media coverage, the role of media, how media has been reporting on climate change-related topics. Looking at the question around who controls the African narrative, but also what is the role, or how do we bring in, creatives and storytellers to the floor, particularly because there is a gap when it comes to that. I mean, it's a big question, but it is us starting to unpack exactly where the gaps are and perhaps how, and I think that's the biggest question we can leave ourselves with today. We are bringing in the whys, but I think the how is important for us to start moving towards.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Nomshado, thanks. Look, the issue of the African question, I mean, as editors, we have what we call the African Editors Forum. We had our elections earlier this year. We organized African Media Convention in Accra some 4 weeks back. It's led by, editors from across the continent. But the one thing that we have always been clear about as the media, as journalists, I'm sitting here knowing that I sleep easy when there was a funder, the American government specifically wanting to fund us, give us money to run a certain project, much as it was well-meaning, and we politely declined that money. It's money that we don't need because, first of all, as journalists, we don't accept money from government, so that's what we do. So funders, and if you look at organizations like your Daily Maverick, you go to their websites, funders are there. And those funders have never had either, in my conversations with Steely, with Branco, that the funders control what they need to report or what they don't have to report. So any self-respecting journalist knows that when the funder is there, the funder can tell you to say this, don't say this, and control those narratives. So the second point about creatives is 2 documentaries you're mentioning. We all know, I mean, if you look at, for instance, the financial statements of MultiChoice, they've had a huge subscriber drop, not only in South Africa, across the continent, because it's a battle for eyeballs. And eyeballs are battled through what? Through the algorithms of the numbers. So Netflix does the same. If I go to Netflix, what I watch with the subscription I pay, I like watching the history of football because I like football. And what the notification I'm going to get now on my app is, this is what's related to that. This is what you can watch. Here's a documentary on Diego Maradona or whatever. This is the history of the Euros. That's what I'm going to get. So if ever you are going to engage Netflix and you go to them and you say to them, but the marketing of this and considering how much content is there, that's what creatives do. And creatives are always fighting for that. I mean, it's quite, we all know the most watched and the most commercially viable across the world. I mean, if ever you say here in South Africa, what is the most watched show? And the SABC will tell you, and MultiChoice can only sit there and, you know, admire the numbers. It's not the news show on SABC that's watched. That's not what's bringing in most advertising on SABC. You know, it's a battle. The SABC are sitting there, they're smiling. They know it's between Skim Sam and Uzalo. That's the most watched. That's the most watched. When advertisers commercially, when they go to the SABC and they say, we would like to advertise and use one of your radio stations to show us the numbers, the SABC presents them with Ukhozi FM. And Ukhozi FM has, what, almost 6 million listeners listening as we speak now. And they are not talking about climate change. They're running the commercial agenda there. That's what's paying the money. And you go to SABC, you say, okay, Radio 2000 is one of your most growing stations. I want to put this topic here about climate change and come to my offices and I'll host one of your shows. They want 300,000 for that because that's the business. So you understand the business side of thing of that, and then trying to also put in the numbers there where I mean, my sister there spoke about they not getting this media coverage and all of that. But the one tip I can give her is that media is about engagement. It's about engaging journalists. It's about going to journalists. It's about talking to them. Not only when you want the story published. It's about saying to someone, okay, maybe I don't have a budget for a PR company, but how about I have coffee with this guy so that I can have this conversation with him and then I start spreading it out. You know, that's one of the things we have learned over the years where CEOs say, okay, Reggie, come with 10 editors, it's Chatham House rules, but let's talk about this. So having the issues out there, that's the one way of doing it. But journalists also, they need that where, I mean, we spoke about that, where they can't be everywhere, but there's no journalist who can shut out the story because, it's not interesting. It's not. But I mean, obviously, if you're going to call a journalist now and say, tomorrow let's have coffee at 11 and discuss climate change. Not tomorrow, any other day, but not tomorrow. You understand? So it's about that timing. It's about targeting those. But it's, but it's not as if there's a total hollowing out of the newsroom that the newsroom can do anything. Thanks.
You can definitely add, yeah.
Yeah, with your indulgence, I'd like to slip in here, please. You know, this question around, funders' agendas. I really think we need to remind ourselves that there's no one on this planet that doesn't have an agenda, right? We all have a perspective that is informed by our life experiences, our political and social analysis of what's been going on around us, and what we feel we would need and want to do about it. Right? I think we really need to start there. And we really also need to accept the fact that the editorial function is about aggregating the agendas that matter for that particular outlet. Right? That's why we elect to read, say, a City Press, RIP, versus a Daily Maverick, right? Or we might elect to read a De Burger as opposed to De Sun. It's because those outlets are looking to speak to specific kinds of audiences and serve their interests, whereas we have an agenda as audiences, and we vote with our feet by paying for supporting, engaging, and interacting with those outlets, right? Now, the digital disruption has demonstrated to us that because our media have not been able to keep up with the attention audience and the attention economy. And the attention economy here, I really mean about understanding the needs, the interests, and the aspirations of their audiences, their users, right? The algorithm. This is why the whole floor has fallen out from underneath them. This is not unique to South Africa. It's happening all over the world. because technology is fast, it innovates, and, you know, folks were caught sleeping. And that's just our reality all over the world. Now, when you ask the question around funders, you know, are funders funding an agenda? Well, yes, funders are funding an agenda. For some funders, that agenda is an imperialist agenda, right? To say, well, you know, continue with fossil fuels, continue with coal in Africa, while Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand scale up their renewable energy capability so that they can then be able to stay the dominant global economic superpowers that they have been, the group of 8, well, 7 now, right? And then we are sold the story and the agenda that actually we need to hold on to coal, gas, and other fossil fuels because this is what is critical for our development. The very frank and real situation here is that it is absolutely not. The science shows us this, the economics shows us this, everywhere you go. China, for instance, which has been one of the major emitters in the world, not for their own sake, but in order to develop by servicing the consumerism that brought us this problem to begin with in the industrial states, China, the workshop of the world idea, right, is leading the charge across the world in terms of scaling up and ramping up their renewable energy capability. But here we are saying, no, 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 Western imperialist agenda. So I think we really need to be paying attention to these discourses of climate delay. There's a fantastic paper that's been written by, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to quickly go into my notes. There's a fantastic paper that was presented by a group of writers led by William F. Lamb called Discourses of Climate Delay. It's open access. If you Google it and you Google William F. Lamb, you will find that paper. It's 5 pages long and it's not in highfalutin academic language. It's really very honest, real, and straightforward. And it really presents to us a really useful framework that I hope to be able to blow up here at some point, or maybe just share in the post notes from this event. It shares with us with a framework to understand how the agenda, the climate responsive development agenda, is actually being deployed, particularly in the majority world. Us here, who were called the third world, the global south, the emerging developing economies, etc. And there are 4 key things to pay attention to here. 1, there's one of redirecting responsibility. We are not responsible for climate change, so we shouldn't have to do anything about it. Right? That's a clear fallacy. We're not responsible for it, but we're directly affected by it. In fact, far worse off, and so we've got to do something about it. We don't have the same level and measure of responsibility, but we can't continue contributing to the problem, right? So we've got to do something. 2, pushing non-transformative solutions. There's a sudden focus on carbon credits. Let's maximize on carbon sinks in Africa and trade in carbon credits. These escape hatches that enable the oil and gas majors, Shell and Total, who've been trying to drill for oil on our coasts and leave the same mess that they've left in West Africa, Angola, Nigeria, etc., in order to enrich their home countries in Europe, who are fabulously wealthy and fabulously self-righteous about what needs to happen in terms of making the transition from fossil fuels to renewables, right? That is the cycle, that is the agenda, and they're telling us that, no, we must hold on to the escape hatches. We can't hold on to the escape hatches. We need to focus on ramping up our capability. Now, that story has to be told. That analysis, that critical perspective has to be brought into the story so that folks are able, especially in labor, are able to navigate this thing, to understand that, yes, we see you. We see you that you're going to lose jobs. But you're holding on to jobs today that will be gone in 5, 10 years' time because of all of the major trade wars that are coming up in our major trade partner economies, Europe, North America, and so forth, who are protecting their industries and casting us aside because we are continuing on this course of carbon-intensive production. 3rd, emphasizing the downsides of making the transition. Jobs will be lost. Yes, jobs will be lost, but more jobs will be produced along the process. It's not going to be a job for a job, But the scale at which we are going to be ramping up the reindustrialization of our country, if we go on this course, the potential is immense, and we can make fundamental changes. Who is telling that story in our media? Who is bringing those critical perspectives? TIPS is producing the data, the analysis around that. And TIPS is not the only one. There are any number of think tanks, civil society organizations, academic research institutions, which are showing us concrete pathways for leveraging this moment. But we are being told to focus on, and I dare even say, Reggie, that even through our publishers, our major news outlets, they are holding on to the story that actually the debate here is that this just transition is not just because jobs are going to be lost, without going even deeper into the analysis to understand what the futures are looking like, the realistic ones, the aspirational ones, and the far into the future ones. And because these are the things that guide decision making, right? As the whole world builds this aeroplane while we are flying it. We don't have a lot of time left. The last one, surrender. The story is told that, well, we don't have the power in Africa to compete with the global north, so we must just, accept what we've got and burn as much oil as we can, burn as much gas and coal as we can, because nothing is going to change. Well, if you're not going to be at the table, you're going to be on it. You're on the menu. Right, and I think this is really what is happening with us here. So, agendas, everyone has one, right? The question is, what is the agenda that you choose to have and why? What is the agenda that media choose to have and why within the specific scope of their mandate and their editorial function, right? Their role in democratic society. How do we hold them accountable to that? And how do we stimulate the kind of engagement for a more progressive, engaged agenda that is focused on ambitious climate action, but is still nevertheless critical, engaged, thoughtful about the implications of the various decisions that are having to be made literally on a day-by-day basis. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think before I do open, definitely, please do give them a round of applause. I think you've beautifully actually laid it out in terms of a realistic term as to where we are now and what needs to start happening for us to actually, deal with the issue from a continental but also a country perspective. And we cannot move away from, I think, this burning question around, capacity, Reggie, and I think I'll bring you in, Thandi, a bit there. Because, I think it's been alluded that there's a lot of events-based reporting with obviously some political narrative or agenda. And we're moving away from actually getting to the contextualizing the issue, going more in depth and looking at how can we actually ensure that the society understands the issue that we're dealing with. And I mean, it's a big one, but the reality is, we need to start mapping out the capacity issue and ensure that we're bringing in, the climate change experts, the academics, the civil society, and so forth, all the role players. How do we connect or ensure that we're connecting media or upskilling media? Because we can say that sustainability, I mean, that's a larger issue in terms of, funding models and so forth. But I think we need to touch on a bit on that capacity part of it.
No. Look, Nomshado, I think we all agree, all of us in the room, that there's a clear lack of capacity in terms of the journalists we have, in terms of our newsrooms, and I think newsrooms, whether you are looking at broadcast, whether you are looking at digital, at print, they've gone smaller. They've really gone smaller. So when you go there to capacitate, you also need to be talking to the editor that, can I come in and capacitate, but as I capacitate, I'm capacitating for certain issues or for certain beats. Because if you are not going to do that, then once you leave and that journalist has been empowered, while you're working in the climate change space, it will all be lost, because then you never made it clear. So yes, there is a lack of capacity. There's, as we said earlier, there's fewer journalists. As we said earlier, if we are sitting here where we at now, Johannesburg is South Africa's largest media concentrate. But as most media is here, and you say a journalist needs to get into a car, or we need to book flights for them to go to the Eastern Cape or to KZN. There's no money for that, unfortunately. There's no resources for that. There are no cars, there's fewer cameras. Those cameras need to go elsewhere. The journalists that are there, they need to go elsewhere to cover something else. So that lack of capacity exists. It's been existing for a number of years now. And the question is, when we reinvest in the newsroom, how do we reinvest it? But the other criticism that we always get as a media, and I always have this one-on-one sort of discussion, not argument with Katie, is also of voices, particularly of voices of women, when we say, let's get these voices, let's get the opinion pieces there, where we see less and less women being quoted, less and less women's opinion pieces being published and all of that. So as you get those voices, I don't think it's an issue of when now I take the phone and I call Ferial at Daily Maverick to say, here's an opinion piece about climate change written by Tandy. She'll say to me, nah, Reggie, I'm not interested. I won't publish it. She'll publish it. But it's a question of where are these pieces? If these pieces are being written, write the opinion pieces and share them. You don't have to obsess with, I want this piece to be in the City Press, which is a print edition. The piece can go to Adrian at News 24, to Branko at Daily Maverick, to EWN or wherever. But these pieces needs to be written. And while they are written, you can do all you want and say, I'll go on and capacitate the journalists and all of that. But as I said earlier, you need to come out to say, here's what we are doing. And I know that I'm competing with sport, I'm competing with politics, I'm competing with this, but here are the issues that we have to take out there. Can you believe, from what Sekwetlane has said, how many people out there still believe the narrative by Minister Mantashe when he says, all those coal stations, they can't go because jobs will be lost. But mining industries are losing jobs. Sibanye at the moment is about to get rid of 4,000 workers. They are already on 2.5. So the unpacking of that, where a minister says that and is not as challenged the way he should be challenged, and we let it slide. So those are some of the things that we say, okay, I'll be kicked out of this press conference. Journalists have been kicked out, but let me ask all these questions. So those are some of the things where you say, understand the issue. When we were trained at journalism school, where we said, Reggie, we're making you understand the issue. 95% of this is in your head. Only 5% will be published. So it's about that.
I mean, while Tandy gets the mic, I think we can't also run away from some of the small wins, right? SABC being able to actually start going through manifestos to see if climate change was actually part of, the topics there. And I think also organizations such as, Climate Comms, we do have Chris Vick there at the back, I'm sorry for putting the spotlight on you, who are also contributing to ensuring that the narrative is really on the ground and taken to those that need it. Tandy?
Yeah, I think my points around this was going to be about collaboration. And we know the challenges that media are facing. We know the challenges that journalists are facing. We also know what they can do when they do have the resources, like we saw with how media were able to cover elections. When there are the resources available, we still have unbelievable journalism and really good practices when we want to. And so we need to find how we can use some of that to cover big issues like climate change. But I want to come back to the point about collaboration. If we know that media have these challenges, and we're speaking to each other, I think in the room, I think we're not going to argue about the point that we need to do better, and we need to make it a public interest issue. But we also then need to work together so that journalists have the resources available to be able to better report on the issue. And that's where we have, this is the start of hopefully a really good partnership with the likes of New Economy Hub and Climate Comms around getting messaging out there and easily digestible and understandable messaging out there, because as much as I think our colleague mentioned, the fact that there is research there and there is material, but we're not seeing this being translated. As much as I think it's still there, I still think, journalists and ordinary people don't really understand the crux of what we're talking about. Lister, my colleague in the very beginning, sort of threw out the question of, well, what's the difference between global warming and climate change? And I don't know if everyone just wasn't sort of warmed up yet or not, but no one answered. And if we in the room can't, engage with a basic question like that, how are we expecting ordinary people to set the agenda for media? So I think it's about collaboration, working together, and ensuring that issues like this, as public interest issues, we set the agenda for media to then follow.
Thank you so much. Chris, do you want to add anything to that? And then I'm definitely opening up the floor for comments and questions. I did see a hand with the lovely lady in pink. We can just give Chris the moment. A bit of a free marketing there.
No, I don't want to talk about climate cons, but I will. It's a really...
So sorry. Clearly today the mics are not... Yeah.
What Sekotlane, for example, is saying, what Thandi is saying, what people are saying. Because you talk about climate change as a beat, as if it's covering netball. And it's not. It's everything. It's labor, it's politics, it's health, it's education, it's agriculture, it's mining, it's the future. And that's why, I get as frustrated about climate change as I did about COVID, is you miss the point. People want to understand why we have these tornadoes and how we can prevent entire communities from being destroyed. In the same way that they wanted to understand why a vaccine saves your life rather than killing you. There's a huge role. I know your primary job as a journalist feels like it's to deliver audiences to advertisers, and too often that's the problem. But it's not. It's also to help people navigate their way through what is becoming a very, very difficult world to live in. So my question is there the intellectual capacity to realize that this is not a beat, it is the beat, and that climate change mindsets and understandings and analysis should permeate all coverage, even football, right? There's stuff in The Guardian today about the French Olympics, that athletes are gonna cook and drink water more often than they used to. The dots are everywhere. I really would like to know that there's some introspection among South African journalists around this issue. Because as Sekotlane says, if we're not at the table, we're on the table. And that applies to journalism as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. There's one more hand. And there's a second one as well.
Melody Emmett, freelancer. Well, just following on from Chris, I think it is a very important point not to see environmental reporting as a separate beat, like health or anything else. And that the intersectionality is everywhere. For example, South Africa is the biggest exporter of coal to Israel after Colombia, the second biggest importer. and that Colombia has just introduced embargoes. South Africa is not, although the ANC government, obviously has, before the government of national unity, we don't know whether it's going to capitulate, we hope not, has shown support for Palestinians. And of course, there are consequences of that in terms of jobs, in terms of Gwedi Mantashe and huge sort of political consequences, but everything is interrelated. In the beginning, when William opened this session, he spoke about the impact of war on the environment. How much research has been done on that? That is a way into the topic, given the reporting and South Africa's position with the ICJ, etc. That is a way into the topic that will, attract readers that might not immediately read an environmental story. So I just want to endorse what Chris said about the intersectionality and how this is a way of reporting that I think will attract more attention. And of course, one has to be aware of the algorithms. One has to constantly be aware of the algorithms and consciously write with that in mind.
Thank you so much for that, Melody. There was one more hand. Oh, I'm not sure who was first. Lester was first, yeah. Claim the mic.
So, very interesting conversation that we're having today. Many different issues have come out. And just everything that has come out, I think we all agree that we are in trouble with climate change, and we need to treat it as we agree, we need to treat it as a serious issue, we need to treat it as an urgent issue, we need to treat it as an issue that needs urgent redress. So how can we do that? I guess Media Monitoring Africa's submission is that the media should step up, and we've learned, we've heard, we've determined that there's minimal coverage on climate change. We've also heard that there's fewer resources now in the newsroom, and we heard from Reggie give numbers of journalists from 5 years, from 15 years till now. So there's little coverage on climate change. There's also fewer resources in the newsrooms. How do we ensure that we use the small resources or the fewer resources that are existing, that are there currently in
Sorry,
newsrooms?
Lester, we were asked if you could just put it yeah, there you go, for the online audience.
I kiss it. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, so my question, well, not really a question, but my submission is, how do we make sure that we leverage the fewer resources that are there in newsrooms to enhance coverage or representation of climate change in its entirety, so that every issue that has been, that has come out today is reflected in media coverage, and so that the coverage actually gets an impact, or the intended impact, and this is obviously to get redress to the issue. And just to emphasize a few points, I think what we can do is that the few stories that are there on climate change, how about they are reported in such a way that is impactful, so that we move away? Yes, we need more coverage on climate change, but how about we just, not just, but how about we also work to improve the coverage that is currently there, so that we move away from one, event-based coverage to issue-based coverage, because climate change has to be treated as an important issue that, doesn't have to be reported on surface. How about we also leverage the fewer resources that are there to make sure that the coverage that is done, the small coverage that is done on climate change, is not only issue-based, but also is properly packaged, properly unpacked for the ordinary citizens, so that they're also able to contribute and engage in the discourse of climate change. How about we also just make sure that we, as journalists, when I say we, I mean as journalists, as activists, but mostly as journalists, we ensure that the minimal coverage that we're doing on climate change, other than it being issue-based, properly packed, unpacked and everything, but there's also diversity in the types of issues, because we've just heard now that there's a lot of different issues under climate change. It's not just one issue. It's not just the issues that we see or in the media, but there's a whole lot of other different issues. So how do we make sure that we use the small resources to also make sure that the small coverage that is there is diverse in issues that are reported, but also in voices, so that we get more experts represented in coverage, experts in the room and experts everywhere else. Women as well, and ordinary citizens, because we've been talking about ordinary citizens being left out of the agenda and all of this. So my whole point is just on using the fewer resources that we have to make sure that the minimal coverage that we have is better, so that it's still impactful and not just wasted space in coverage where the story does not lead anywhere or does not do anything for the ordinary citizens, does not do anything for the political leaders or governments that are supposed to be working together with different experts in the field to make sure that climate change as an issue is addressed or begins to even be addressed, because I think we're barely scratching the surface. Thank you.
That's amazing, Lester. How do we stretch the little resources that we have? I'm gonna take, is that a hand? Okay. I am looking at time, so if there are any burning comments and hands, this is your chance. And then I'm gonna give it back to the panel to just give their closing remarks, and then I'll then proceed to conclude on the way forward from here.
Okay. No, so my thing is also like on really addressing once again this collaboration that is required. I mean, some of the things that, okay, I do think this is an issue of a microcosm of the bigger issue of what capitalism has done, financialization has done, that is actually spilled over to the media, because the key voice of the media was to act as a fourth estate, to say that we are here to give knowledge to people. And how is it that things like the media lists are now intellectual property and their business marketing strategies, instead of being readily available to institutions such as ourselves, who are a think tank, who can capacitate the media, who don't have the time because they're chasing the algorithm and the sensational news that will bring them the numbers, to invest their time in being able to be capacitated by people who are studying this daily about what it means, as I did mention before, what hydrogen is, what energy is, what the green economy is, what a just transition looks like for South Africa, outside of what a just transition would look like for Europe, because we've got structural issues from apartheid that we can't run away from. So I think some of these collaborations really need to be strengthened amongst the media. And I know that the media is also in competition with itself, but I mean, honestly, it's urgent. It is an urgent priority what's going on with the climate issue and the climate consequences. I mean, one of the things that I read last week was that our ports are one of the weakest in the world. And of course, Transnet will deny this, but our ports are one of the weakest in the world because of new climate issues that were not there a few years ago. All of the things that are happening with the floods that are affecting human in the transport sector. Our ports, Durban is our most important point of trade. If we're not going to be able, if we're going to have flooding and all of these crises, climate crises in those areas, what are the communities going to look like? How will our businesses be affected? How will our regional integration be affected? So, and the systems, as Mr. I forgot your name, sorry, said, the fact that the system, we're not actually responsible for this climate crisis, but we are the most vulnerable to it. And it is urgent, because some of these systems, to build them, just let alone facilities and all of these wind farms, it takes about 5 to 10 years to build these systems. So we're not even looking at something that you can build today and start employing people tomorrow. But it means that we need to collaborate with the schools and start capacitating the schools to have the skills gap that we already have, which means we're already 5 years too late, basically. If it's that urgent, we're already 5 years too late, because to just build one wind farm will take 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Is there another hand? Okay, there you go.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I came late precisely because of some of the challenges that communities are actually facing. My question, I'm picking up on what Chris was saying, the importance of making sure that there is intersectionality between, the issues that we discuss around issues of climate change and so on. I think it's almost like a year when a small community in Watville complained about what they suspect as the thumping of the permafrost. Now you have illegal activities in terms of mining, illegal mining which is taking place, which is actually impacting on the permafrost. If you know about that story, you would know that in Kenya, an entire village was wiped out because of the gas that emanated from the lake. It was actually, what is this gas? Just went out of my mind. But the story is out there. And communities like, the small community is battling issues like this at the height of ignorance and at the height of, I would imagine, pressure from the capitalist system, because the interest here is really to push, I would imagine, what is this, profit margins, even by the small guy. Because even the small guy who is illegally mining is paying someone big. And some of us would really like that media also takes an active interest in reporting some of these issues using that particular angle, because after all, it is about what is the social justice.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, it is just literally after 1. If you don't mind me giving my panelists a minute each to try and summarize, number 1, obviously based from the comments and questions you got on the floor, but also, generally throughout the whole day since morning, the conversations that we've been having. So if I can give you 1 minute each for you to do that, and I'll start with you, Tandy, since you've got the mic.
All right. Yeah, I think, so in my closing point, and I've only got a minute, but I wanted to raise 2 issues. The one is that Afrobarometer released some of their survey results recently. And one of the surveyed questions was, what are the most important issues to ordinary people living in South Africa? And the issues, the top 5 included unemployment, crime and security, electricity, corruption, and water supply. Now, all of those have climate change angles to it. And we're not hearing that come out in media coverage. Never mind that these top 5 issues don't necessarily feature that high on the agenda in the first place, but they all have climate change angles to them. And so for media to do their job of playing their role and responsibility, we need to figure out how we can get that on the agenda. The last issue that I wanted to raise in closing is that media don't have a responsibility to talk about climate change just for the sake of talking about climate change. We have seen the amount of mis and disinformation about climate change. This isn't just an issue to us, but as we know, the global issue. And in order to counter that information and to counter those disinformation narratives, media have to do a better job. So I think I'll leave it at that with those parting thoughts.
Thank you so much, Tandy.
Thanks so much, Tandy. So I just want to continue from there. A better job. Media have to do a better job. And I'd like to offer some very practical suggestions or challenges to our media. And here I really want to put Sanef on the spot with regards to this. So the first thing, we get it. There are capacity and capability constraints because of the systemic viability and sustainability crisis that our media are facing all round. Even so, because we foresaw this happening at least 15 years ago, right? And we play for play, it's happening in the way that we foresaw it. because we foresaw it, key movement generous media community utilities were developed and experimented with to demonstrate that there is another way that could help plug the gaps and we could maybe build from there. We've got institutions like Oxpeckers. How many of you have seen Oxpeckers' website and have seen their Power Tracker tool and the reporting that's emerged out of it, right? I really encourage you to go into Oxpeckers' website, oxpeckers.org.za, click on the Power Tracker tab. You will see a whole slew of reporting that's informed by very ground-based, data-driven analysis, right? Then they map all the renewable energy projects that are coming online and have been slated. They're mapping all of the existing coal and related fossil fuel projects that are phasing out or slated to be phasing out just in Mpumalanga, and they're looking to expand that across the country. If you go there already, there's a key rich resource for journalists to work with, to build on and from, right? But also for publishers to take the content that Oxpeckers offers gratis, for free, and republish it. It's as simple as that. Just republish what they're publishing. It already starts to plug the gap, and it's without any investment from yourself. It starts to build the demand, the social demand for this kind of content to prove the point that climate is the center of the story. The Conversation Africa. Science-based, science-led news and analysis. They report on papers, published papers by PhD researchers with accredited institutions, as well as analysis on news, current affairs, topical issues that are playing themselves out on any range of issues by same subject specialists, right? Now, again, they offer their content for free, gratis, to publishers, to republish and avail to people to plug the gaps and lead the conversation with real, credible evidence, right? People who know what they're doing. We've got plenty to build on from there, right already. Incidentally, I understand that South Africa has been stagnating, the South African media ecosystem has been stagnating and declining on various beats and issues in terms of the republishing that the Conversation receives. I ask myself the question, how is that possible? Why is that the case? We're seeing massive growth in regions like East Africa, as well as West Africa, in terms of their republishing rates. What makes us so special that we would not want to take on this fantastic resource that is offering African-based perspectives about Africa, and they're all diverse across beats, across issues, around like, how do we rise to this moment? So I encourage you all, theconversation.co.za. It'll take you straight to the Africa page if you're logging in from South Africa or any other African country. And then you will see there's a lovely climate tab right on the left-hand side of the page, and you will see just the range, scope, and depth of reporting. And guess what? It also offers journalists, editors, leads to voices. African voices and African perspectives about Africa on the most significant issues pertaining to the climate and development intersection, or nexus, as it pertains to Africa. So those are just two of many. There's TIPS, right, who have been doing fantastic work around climate responsive budgeting, right, and supporting Treasury to start coding what is a just transition transaction and what is not. How do we get climate and account for climate on the national budget, the provincial budgets, as well as on the local government budgets? Basic stories about basic things that media ought to be and do cover and report on, adding that climate dimension. We've got African resources like APRI, the African Policy Research Institute, right? Who, again, PhD researchers, policy analysts, providing really critical data that didn't exist before. And now here it is. It's made by Africans for Africans to use to start advancing our progressive African agenda, particularly on things like trade, economy, regional integration, and so forth, right? And then, of course, we've got climate comms, which helps to blow out that content, give it more mileage in this attention economy where people are really more driven by the influences and channels that resonate with their own personal perspectives and with whom they can interact, as opposed to media who are unidirectional, right? Although we still need them because they become the outlets of record, right? So once again, work with them. There's an abundance of resources. Message me, go onto our website, and have a look at like what's available. We can really talk about how to build the capability that we need. Some practical challenges to publishers. One, I don't think that newsrooms really understand what they have and don't have or need in order to be able to report the climate story with any measure of depth, credibility, clarity that is required right now, perhaps even 5 years ago at the very least. So I'm asking the question and maybe posing the challenge. Why don't we work together and develop a newsroom needs analysis, right? Let's figure out, like, if for the editors of our leading outlets are saying we need to respond to the climate story, I know it's there on your website and in your vision mission, then let's get to business and practically map out what that will take from a easy lift, low resource, all the way to the Rolls-Royce, right? And then let's use that then to build a case for the investment that is required and the terms on which that investment should actually function, should happen. 2, capacity building of that specialized skills and capability in reporting, right? Let's really talk very practically about what that will look like, what that will take. What does it require from the universities, from the colleges, but most significantly also from media development and media support organizations such as MMA, so that we can really have that dynamic, engagement that you've spoken about already. It's more than knowledge. It also requires the mentorship from senior journalists, editors, etc. They too need to understand the story, because we also know that the reason why we're seeing this decline in media is that newsrooms were not sufficiently prepared for the digital disruption, largely because our editors themselves were not engaged enough with the digital dimension that we were heading into at least 15 years ago. Third and lastly, we need a structural facility, like a facility, right, that does this engagement work. Let's call it an engagement platform, right? If we need to be engaging in this regular and dynamic way, then we need to have a platform or a mechanism that enables that to happen from the wealth of resources I've already listed already. This is a facility that shares the news, the information, the analysis, the opinion that you said that all the publishers are hungry for and ready to publish. We don't want the coverage to be led by opinion and opinion only. It does need to also be news, critical news and analysis, right? In fact, that's really what should be at the center. But nevertheless, we need to find ways and develop ways and mechanisms that people can be able to access publishers at scale, so that, we get that coverage happening and there is that relationship being rebuilt between media users, audiences, people who are providing the research, the knowledge, the analysis, and so forth, so we can have that, we can go back to that fourth estate function that media did once play and now are getting weaker and weaker at really demonstrating as we go into this media sustainability and viability crisis that's facing us. Thank you.
I think we will probably be here the whole entire day if ever we're going to say media is getting weaker and weaker. I think if it was getting weaker and weaker, some of us wouldn't be here. We wouldn't even enjoy this democracy. Maybe you'll still have President Zuma as your president if it was getting weaker. That's what the media has been able to do among the many things. What Chris was raising, I mean, Lester in her presentation said, look at the publication like Daily Maverick. The intellect is there, Chris. You need to go and engage with the intellect. You can't tell me there's no intellect if, and I'm using them as an example, if you are sitting at a table with Steely, with Branko, with Janet Head, with Ferial Hafaji, with Hedda Robertson, all these names. The intellect is there, and it has always been there. where you say you've got a plethora of choices to say, who can I engage with in terms of the news media? And what is the news media in South Africa doing? And I'm glad all of you are saying, media this, media don't do that, media this. It ascertains what I always say to everyone. So why the heck are you not supporting them? If you're so reliant on them. If you wake up, I was with my mother this weekend, she says, you journalists are lazy, you are not doing this. And I say to her, but here you are listening to gospel. You are not even listening to the news. You are not supporting them. You are not doing what's supposed to be done by South Africans, and then they wake up and say, media that, media this. You need to support it. You need to, there's 62 million South Africans. If you take 62 million South Africans out of that, how many South Africans are supporting the same media that they have expectations out of? If you want to come to me and say, Reggie, let's build a super newsroom of resources, why not? Build it. You've got the money to fund it. My door is open. You know, my door is open. I'll say, here, let's fund this. Let's do it. And after doing it, I'll reach out to Adrian and News 24. I'll reach out to Moshe at SABC, to John Bailey at ENC and say, here's a resource. I need you to use this resource. But it's not there. You understand? It's not there. You presenting that to me now, which I like. But the obsession in the newsroom at the moment and of getting younger journalists to also read and read and read. Because if you are not going to read, you won't understand any issue. You won't understand anything. I may love football, as I said, but I need to read. And what do I like reading? I like reading political biography. And that's what the younger journalists are doing. So those editors that are there, they are there, and all you have to do is really to engage editors. You need not to be scared of them. If you're scared of them, come to me, then I'll go to them for you. You need not to be scared of them. You need to say, okay, perhaps I need to speak to someone at News 24 or at Newsroom Africa, but I'm scared to call them. So call me. I'll call them for you because they are available. What you're talking about is content. It's content that's different. But also we need to remember that much as we'll always say content and media and this, the big question, and it's a big question where you can say intellectually, you can say intersectionality of issues and all of that. We are sitting here, but the issue in Wadeville is not only the issue there. What we need to take those issues and translate them into ordinary voices, to see these voices going to hear this. Training a journalist. How will this journalist report this in isiXhosa or Sepedi when there's an issue with some mine in Polokwane where people need to understand those issues? How will you capacitate them? Because I don't have the money to go to that journalist and say, I'm here so that you understand what's happening here. Unfortunately, I don't have that. But if you've got the money, if you've got the investment, you say, let me reach out to the media and let me engage with them. Hence, earlier on, I was talking about the trust issue. But when you hear the trust issue, it's an issue where Chris spoke about COVID. At the start of COVID, I think we were the most distrusted platform in terms of the media. But as time went by, we saw more and more credible voices on our screens, sitting at home, being unearthed by the media to say, okay, let's reach out to West University, there's a voice there. Let's reach out to UKZN, there are voices there. There's a professor. And those voices, where were you hearing them? You were watching 403, 404, 405, and it was the same media that was unearthing those voices during COVID. It was the same journalists who were doing the work at the risk of their lives. So that's why I'm saying we need to be fair here, where you've got the expectation of what you need out of the media and what you are putting in for the media to be able to meet your expectations and cover those. You need to be fair to that. You say, because I can't be in a marriage and be unhappy with my wife, but my wife doesn't know that I'm unhappy with her. But I wake up every day and I'm unhappy. So we need that to say, let's speak to these journalists, let's speak to these news organizations, and let's hear what are their challenges and where can we meet them halfway, because this story needs to be told.
meeting halfway, and clearly it's saying it's time for lunch. Okay. I'll just turn that on, and I'm going to bring that into the coffee. Okay, so thank you, Reggie, for that. And I think ending on that note, I know we did just go over the 1 o'clock that I did promise earlier on, but you can all agree that, you know, all the inputs and discussions that we're having now are quite crucial. Just to give a closing remark around Green Voices, which is something you're still going to see in the future, because this was an initiative that was really started by MMA. Okay, that was started by MMA to start fostering these type of engagements around, you know, the research work that we do, but also to build a community of, you know, sharing resources, sharing capacity as well. And this is us looking at pockets of future dialogues where we're engaging with media, engaging, you know, with leaders in the space, engaging with different CSOs and so forth. So it is a start of something bigger, particularly when we're emphasizing on collaboration. So what you're seeing here was us kind of softly launching the idea of having these dialogues and ensuring that we're meeting media halfway, but also mapping out, you know, where the gaps are truly are and how can we assist in filling those gaps, but also how do we stretch the small resources that we currently have to ensure that these narratives are really, you know, driven and disseminated to society. I'd like to thank our partners, CENEF and New Economy Hub. When we did approach them, I think we did not make a mistake, and I think we can all agree on that, was this is a powerful collaboration that I think can really drive key stakeholders coming into the table, coming to the table and not on the table, and ensuring that, you know, we're participating in this conversation and bringing the on-the-ground voices to the conversation as well. I'd like to thank you for really bearing with me with the overtime, but also staying with us since morning to really engage with us today. I'm not going to hold you between you and the matters of the stomach and lunch. So on that note, I'd like you guys to please, for the last time, give a huge round of applause to our panel. I think they did a very amazing job in terms of bringing different perspectives of the issue, and I think we really got key solutions from today that can drive us forward, you know, to ensure that we're getting the coverage or seeing the coverage that we're envisioning. Lunch will be served at the foyer, so as you proceed out going this way, you'll see that there is a setup for lunch there. I do encourage you, if you did not get a nice little goodie bag from us to say thank you for coming, please do grab one as you go out for lunch. And as I said, this is a future conversation. You will be getting some additional notes and the presentations that were shared today for you to further engage with them. And if you do have any questions or any conversations that you want to have further or input, we are open via email to have that discussion as well. Thank you so much. I cannot even begin to appreciate the engagement and inputs that you guys really brought forward. Please give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you. I think I can officially adjourn.
Mali musolo,